You are watching the World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Here's your daily dose of the top stories from around the world. Ahead of holding the 22nd India-Russia summit, Putin hosted Mr. Modi for a private meeting and dinner at his estate in the suburbs of Moscow. Sources say this was an opportunity for the two leaders to focus on more sensitive issues on the agenda, such as the Ukraine war and its fallout, as well as the repatriation of Indian nationals recruited into the Russian army. NATO leaders are gathering in Washington, D.C. amid global conflict and rising tensions from Ukraine to the Taiwan Strait. But it's the political future of the alliance's most powerful member, the United States, analysts warn, that's expected to be a core focus of discussions. Amid the heatwave episodes creating havoc, last month was the hottest June ever recorded, according to the EU's Climate Monitoring Service. This follows a year of consistently high temperatures, making 2024 likely to be the hottest year in history. A children's hospital in Kyiv has been hit after Russia launched a wave of missile strikes against cities across Ukraine. Alec Baldwin is heading to trial on involuntary manslaughter charges in a case that will be closely watched by the entertainment industry, the news media, tabloids, as well as legal experts. French President Emmanuel Macron has asked his Prime Minister to remain in post for the time being to ensure the country's stability after election results left no party with an outright majority. Well, in the inaugural bilateral visit of his third term and his first to Russia since it invaded Ukraine back in February 2022, Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Moscow with a clear message that New Delhi sought to play a supportive role for a peaceful and stable region, and both sides were committed to deepening their special and privileged strategic partnership in futuristic areas of cooperation. But the big development, our sources say, Russia has decided to discharge and facilitated return of all Indians working in the Russian army after our Prime Minister took up the matter with President Putin just a few hours ago. Earlier confirming that several Indians have actually been duped into working in the Russian army, our Ministry of External Affairs had said it had strongly taken up the matter with the Russian government for the early discharge of such Indian nationals. My colleague Vasudha Venugopal has been tracking the latest updates from Moscow. But first, listen in to what the Russian president had to say regarding Mr. Modi.
आदरणीय प्रधानमंत्री जी, परम दोस्त, आपका स्वागत है, हार्दिक स्वागत है। आपको देखने से मुझे बड़ी खुशी है।
Официальные разговоры у нас состоятся завтра.
औपचारिक बातचीत कल होने वाली है।
А сегодня мы можем в такой домашней обстановке спокойно поговорить, наверное, о тех же вопросах, но неофициально.
और आज अनौपचारिक रूप से हम घर के वातावरण में हम उसी मामलों पर बात कर सकते हैं।
The big development being Russia has decided to discharge and facilitated return of all Indians working in the Russian army. We have these details thanks to my colleague Akhilesh, who joins us live. Akhilesh, what have your sources disclosed?
Sources have confirmed that in the private dinner which was hosted by the Russian President Vladimir Putin last night, Prime Minister Narendra Modi raised this issue before him, and that Indians are worried. We have been reporting that how families in Punjab and Haryana, especially, they are worried about the safety of their family men because they were recruited in Russia. They were promised high-paying jobs, and they were misled to be, and they were taken there, and then later on they were recruited in the Russian army and sent on the frontier. That's why President Modi had raised this issue before President Putin last night in the private dinner. And we've been told by the sources that now the Russia has assured and promised that all those Indians who are recruited in the Russian army will be discharged from the army, and the safe return of them will be facilitated by Russia shortly. In the past also, India has raised this matter before the Russia. In fact, the Ministry of External Affairs had formally raised this issue with the Russian counterparts and saying very clearly that they should be returned safely to India. In the past, we have seen that at least 2 Indians have been killed in action at the borders, and India protested before the Russia for the recruitment. Now, Russia has promised that all of them will be discharged and will be sent back to India safely.
A major relief for India indeed. Thank you so much, Akhilesh, for joining us with those crucial details. With that, let's also go across to my colleague Vasudha Venugopal's ground report.
In an important diplomatic move, Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Moscow on Monday. This is his first bilateral meeting since he took charge as the Prime Minister of the country for the third time. He is meeting Vladimir Putin, the President of Russia. In fact, this is the first proper bilateral meeting between the two leaders after 2021 when they met for the annual India-Russia meeting that was held in India. In fact, Mr. Modi has come to Russia, has come to Moscow, in fact, after 9 years. In 2019, he did come to Russia, but he was part of an economic conclave in the eastern city of Vladivostok. Now, this meeting, this visit of Mr. Modi is clearly very important because this is his first visit to Russia after the Ukraine-Russia war broke out. According to sources in the government, the war will also be amongst the agenda points in the meeting between the two leaders in the course of the next 24 hours. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin will be meeting at least 3 times. So there is a lot of face time that they will be getting with each other. Prime Minister Narendra Modi in 2022 on the sidelines of the SEO conference in Uzbekistan, Samarkand, had specifically remarked that this is not an era of war. Ye yug ka yug nahi hai. That is what he had said, which has in some ways become the central theme of India's G20 presidency. It had reverberated even in the joint statement that India had come out along with other countries as part of its G20 presidency, the consensus, the statement of consensus. So that line, that consistency will be repeated even in the meetings with President Putin is what sources are telling us. Apart from that, there could be various announcements in the field of trade, of course, in terms of understanding energy requirements of both countries, also tech transfer, and most importantly defense ties. Remember, India is dependent on Russia for a significant amount of its defense weapons and ammunition. It has been asking for upgraded ammunition and fighter jets, but in the last few years India has also diversified its defense procurement to different countries, specifically USA and also France. Apart from that, India will also be pressing for the early release of several Indians who have been reportedly misled into fighting, into joining the Russian army to fight against Ukraine. There are about 30 to 50 such persons is what we hear from official sources, and in fact 10 of them have been, Indian government has managed to get 10 of them back, and 4 of them unfortunately have died, and India is going to put a lot of pressure on Russia to ensure that that the Indians sort of trapped in this whole nexus get released as soon as possible. Apart from that, there is going to be a lot of talk about tech transfer, space collaboration, and also people-to-people ties. Remember, this is an important meeting for Russia as well, that is seeking to restore some of its lost influence and power in a world that is looking at multilateralism.
For further later updates from Moscow, we also have with us senior journalist Tatiana Kukara. Thanks so much, Tatiana, for making time for us. Many geopolitical experts argue that for Mr. Putin, Mr. Modi's visit is a way for Russia to show that the Kremlin continues to have a strong partnership with India, despite India's deepening relationship with the United States. How do you see this crucial bilateral summit?
Well, and let's not forget, energy being one of the most important, corporations so far. We know that there's, this nuclear plant that is under construction, and we've heard Prime Minister Modi has set already some ambitious goals for his energy agenda. He's been looking to make India more energy self-reliant, and so Russia comes in incredibly handy in this in this task that he has set for himself. Which is why actually tomorrow I think he's due to visit the Rosatom exhibition in Moscow as well. Rosatom being the agency that's constructing those nuclear reactors. So this has been a very fruitful relationship, as you said. It's a conflict-free relationship.
Well, India's purchases of discounted Russian petroleum, though, Tatiana, they have helped fill Russia's coffers, depleted by international sanctions over the war. Many would argue that there is a new world order emerging. How can one then decipher Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin's relationship in that backdrop?
Well, I think that the timing here is obviously incredibly important. And also, let's not forget that it happens at the same time as the NATO leaders are convening, in another part of the world. And that's also no surprise. We have to look at timings with these things. But as you said, there's a massive realignment in the world. But I would actually suggest that Russia and India have been at the forefront of that realignment, and that realignment being the emergence of this multipolar world, the emboldened, global south that we've been talking about for quite some time now, and Russia being crucial to this process, as is India, as rightfully mentioned, your country is looking to be the world's third economy very, very soon, then, probably going to go even further up.
But the Ukraine war has put India in a bit of a delicate diplomatic position with its Western allies. I'm sure you're aware. New Delhi has walked the tightrope, not explicitly condemning the Russian invasion, but calling for an international probe into the Bucha massacre in the early weeks of the war. Not ignoring multilateralism, where do you see India-Russia ties headed?
I think that just as you said, again, I don't believe that we're reinventing our relationship right now. I think Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi have already reinvented that relationship. They have already reinvented world order in a way, putting up that the global south that is now has already risen, and the relationship haven't been so fruitful. Again, I'll remind you that there's a huge nuclear project that we have between our two nations. So that's definitely going to be the future of the relationship as well. So there's going to be more cooperation in terms of energy. There's going to be more cooperation in terms of trade.
Well, thank you so much, Tatiana, for joining us with that ground update. We will, of course, revert to you for regular updates once that summit wraps up. Also, for further clarity and contextualizing the entire summit for us, we have with us former Indian Ambassador Yogendra Kumar, who's also served in the Indian mission in Moscow. Thank you so much, sir, for making time for us. Our sources have now said that Russia has actually decided to discharge and facilitate the return of all Indians that have been working in the Russian army after our Prime Minister actually took up the matter with Mr. Putin just a few hours ago. What does this indicate about India-Russia relations? Is Putin cognizant of not taking this relationship for granted?
Well, I think the release or discharge which you're mentioning, actually it is rather more an outflow of the kind of a human trafficking network which actually operates, because of which some of our innocent Indians have actually been misled and they have actually then joined the Russian army. So I'm afraid I think this is more an issue where both sides, India and Russia, can actually work together to actually crack these human trafficking networks. And this is, in a way, I should say, the emergence of a new kind of situation globally which is rising: transnational crime, terrorism, and even global instability in a way. I think the challenges today globally are very, very different now. The climate change is a big issue, where Russia is suffering, India is suffering, US, everybody is suffering. So the point actually is, as the Prime Minister has been saying, that, it's not the era of war, because the global challenge is so pressing that unless everybody comes together, everybody is going to go down, under the impact of these challenges. These are very, very serious challenges. And I think we have to do our best, all sides, whether it is US or Russia or India or whoever, to actually put these kind of conflicts behind us, because they actually have an effect on destabilizing the global order, which already is in a bad shape.
In fact, sir, experts argue that with Russia having an upper hand in the war and a possibility of Donald Trump returning as the US president later this year, the Prime Minister's visit is being seen as Delhi positioning itself for what could follow 6 months from now. How do you perceive the situation?
Well, I think it's rather unpredictable. I mean, Russia having an upper hand, perhaps, yes, but NATO is now re-energized in supplying weapons to Ukraine. And therefore, it's very difficult to say whether Russia actually is succeeding in this conflict. Because even when there was a gap in the supply of weapons on the side of US and NATO, Russia did not make much of a headway in terms of the situation on the ground. So actually, I am really thinking that, there's a stalemate there. And of course, everybody's position rather entrenched. So I think the effort now has to be the global effort. Everybody of goodwill who is actually concerned about the global stability, the effort now actually has to be to get different sides who are so rather deeply entrenched into their positions, which are rather irreconcilable, that they should actually, perhaps disengage from their entrenched positions and then perhaps work towards some kind of a solution. Because these problems are not going to go away. I mean, you have Ukraine on one side, you have conflict, one was reading about this conflict in Georgia. I mean, the instability in Georgia. You have conflict in Palestine. You have instability in different parts of the world, and these are actually draining the energies and the resources of the world. Climate change is upon us. I mean, we are facing climate change, whether it is, and Russia and US both. I mean, just think about the hurricane, which is now creating havoc in the US, is impacting on the people's lives, on the economy, and so on and so forth. So, these kind of, what should I say, carry over of the Cold War, the messy dissolution of the Soviet Union, that phase has to put behind us and to work now in a manner where everybody actually has to pay attention to what the pressing issues are for us in the near future.
Well, thank you so much, sir, for joining us with your perspective. Always a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, NATO leaders are descending on Washington. NATO leaders actually meet this week for a summit commemorating the 75th anniversary of the military alliance, which has never been larger and more focused, but is also facing potentially existential threats from outside and within. If Russia's war in Ukraine, challenges posed by an increasingly aggressive China, and the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza weren't enough, some key members' commitment to defend their allies is coming under question. There is deep uncertainty over President Joe Biden's ability to beat his predecessor, NATO skeptic Donald Trump. That's in November. Meanwhile, Biden's political troubles are stirring concerns at home and abroad. Countries in Europe are facing their own issues with the rise of far-right populism, particularly in France and Hungary, as you've just seen over the last 2 weeks, threatening what had been a bedrock pillar of post-World War II security and stability. All eyes will be on the developments at this summit in Washington. Well, another crucial news. Last month was the hottest June on record. This is what the EU's Climate Change Monitoring Service has confirmed, continuing a streak of exceptional temperatures that some scientists say puts 2024 on track to be the world's hottest recorded year. Every month since June 2023, that's 13 months in a row actually, has ranked as the planet's hottest since records began, compared with a corresponding month in previous years, the European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service has said in their monthly bulletin. But the latest data suggests that 2024 could outrank 2023 as the hottest year since records began after human-caused climate change and the El Niño natural weather phenomenon both pushed temperatures to record highs in the year so far, some scientists have argued. Well, news and updates continue in a moment, right after this very short break. Welcome back. A children's hospital in Kiev has been hit after Russia launched a wave of missile strikes against cities across Ukraine. 2 people died when Ukraine's biggest pediatrics facility sustained major damage during this latest blast. 36 people were killed and 140 people were injured in the strikes. This is what President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff said. But Russia has denied targeting the hospital, saying it had been hit by fragments of Ukrainian air defense missile, while Ukraine said it had found remnants of a Russian cruise missile. The US State Department has condemned Moscow's latest attack.
Just to be clear, these are sites that serve no military purpose. They're not sheltering Ukrainian military assets. They're not sheltering members of the Ukrainian military. These are civilian infrastructure, pure and simple. But you will see new military, diplomatic, and economic support announced for Ukraine. You will see additional specificity about Ukraine's bridge to Nato.
In other news, the winding prosecution of Alec Baldwin over the fatal shooting on the Rust film set is set to arrive at a trial this week in New Mexico, where a jury will be asked to decide whether his role in the death of the movie's cinematographer amounts to involuntary manslaughter. Here are the details.
How's it going, sir? So my understanding, you were in the room when someone was shot?
Holding the gun, yeah.
Okay, all right.
Almost 3 years after cinematographer Halyna Hutchins was shot and killed on the set of the film Rust, Hollywood star Alec Baldwin is set to enter a New Mexico courtroom for the first time since the October 2021 shooting.
Crazy series of events.
Baldwin, the star and co-producer of the Western film Rust, was pointing a revolver at Hutchins during a rehearsal at a small church in the movie when the gun went off, killing Hutchins and wounding film director Joe Souza.
It said to be an empty gun, and we only with loads when we were ready to shoot. Everybody was prepped. Earplugs, everything.
All right,
Where should I go?
Mr. Baldwin, who's the director on scene?
The guy that was shot.
The guy that was shot? Okay.
Although Baldwin claims he did not pull the trigger but the hammer when the gun fired, he is charged with felony involuntary manslaughter and if convicted could get 18 months in prison. Just last month, Baldwin's attorneys had requested the judge throw out the case, stating that the firearm was damaged during his forensic testing at the FBI lab. However, the motion was denied. As for the film's armorer, who was responsible for overseeing the weapon on set, 27-year-old Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was charged with involuntary manslaughter in April and is currently serving an 18-month jail sentence. In the case of Baldwin's upcoming trial, Gutierrez-Reed has asserted her Fifth Amendment right, and the judge has ruled that she will not have to testify. Baldwin's trial will begin on July 9th, where prosecutors can prove the charge based on the negligent use of firearm or the actor's total disregard or indifference for the safety of others. Baldwin's defense will be arguing that it is not an actor's responsibility to ensure real rounds are in their prop guns, a position that is strongly supported by Baldwin's union, the Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio Artists. The trial at the First Judicial Court of New Mexico is expected to last approximately 10 days, where it will be determined whether the actor is found guilty of the October 2021 shooting. Samia Afsar for NDTV.
Well, to France now, where the President Emmanuel Macron has asked his Prime Minister to remain in post for the time being to ensure the country's stability after election results left no party with an outright majority. The unexpected result leaves French politics in deadlock, though, with no party able to form a government by itself. To the United States now, where Tropical Storm Beryl brought howling winds and torrential rain to southeast Texas, killing at least 4 people, flooding highways, closing oil ports, and cancelling more than 1,300 flights, as well as knocking out power to more than 2.7 million homes and businesses. Beryl, the season's earliest Category 5 hurricane on record, weakened from a hurricane after pounding the coastal Texas town of Matagorda with dangerous storm surges and heavy rain before moving across Houston. This is what the U.S. National Hurricane Center has confirmed. The agency further added that conditions could spawn tornadoes in Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Meanwhile, Thailand is doing away with duty-free shopping at its international airports to boost tourism spending within the country. Duty-free stores at Thai airports logged nearly $82 million in total sales last year, but travelers would spend an average of about $15 elsewhere in the country if they lost access to those shops. This is what the government has estimated. The decision is part of Thailand's larger goal of becoming an international shopping hub. This is what Nikkei has reported. And the country recently cut tax rates for alcohol and nightlife venues and raised the value of tourist purchases required to be checked by customs officials. In fact, Thailand's post-pandemic tourism bounce back is picking up. It's expected to double its visitor total this year compared to 2023. And believe it or not, a Chinese university is now offering the country's first undergraduate degree in coffee science and engineering. At Yunnan Agricultural University, located in the province where 99% of China's coffee is grown, students will learn flavor chemistry and techniques that could boost the domestic talent pool for production. As the 13th largest coffee grower in the world, China only accounts for about 1.1% of global production, but its coffee consumption market is expanding, despite being known for its predominantly tea-drinking culture. Thanks in part to Chinese chains that replicate Western cafe culture and business models, the country now has the world's most branded coffee shops at nearly 50,000, overtaking the United States in the last year. Well, thank you for investing your time and watching this episode of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest developments for you. Do stay tuned.